So we're beginning together a journey, a quest for meaning and purpose. And I don't think it's a journey that has a finite end. I think it's a journey that is an ongoing journey, that as we progress through the years of our lives and the stages and phases of our lives, we continue to deepen into this idea of what is our purpose, what gives us meaning, what really matters to us, and how do we stand in that and live by that. At the heart of our spiritual journey, I think, is this quest to deepen into meaning and to deepen into purpose, to find, as it is called today, to be able to answer the question of why. And when we have the answer to the question why, then whatever it is we find that we have to deal with in our life, it becomes that much easier or more manageable to deal with those things. I think about my own journey into unity. And it was a journey that I never would have consciously picked for myself. I found my way into unity because I was dissatisfied. There was something in my life, in my case, it happened to be a relationship. I was very young, I had fallen in love, and that love was not reciprocated, and I was just crushed. Think about your first love, right? And if it never turned out to be what you had fantasized it to be, you probably dealt with a broken heart for a while. And it was that really got me into unity and into a deep exploration of meaning and purpose in my life, and what is the role of transformation? How do we transform? For many people who find their way into unity, they find their way from something else. A few people are born in unity, but not a whole lot. Most people find their way into unity from something else. And oftentimes they've tried a lot of different things, right? And have given up on a lot of different things. And maybe the last thing that they thought of trying for the first time or trying again is this God thing, right? Have I touched and named the experience of any of you? Yeah. But then we find ourselves in this, and if we stay long enough, and let it not just be at the surface level, but if we stay in it long enough and really begin to work with the ideas and the principles, we find that we do begin this journey and continue this journey of transformation. Transformation isn't easy. Transformation isn't quick. Have you noticed that? It's not quick. It's usually not very comfortable. Have you noticed that? And it's usually not very clean and easy. It's rather messy. It's kind of like birth. Have you ever been at a live birth? Well, of course, you've been at your own, but you probably don't remember a whole lot about it. But if you've ever been at a live birth, whether it is of a human baby or another mammal, it's kind of messy, isn't it? Are you there? It's very messy. It can also be very, very dangerous. Can be very dangerous. But out of that comes new life. Out of that comes new life. And so transformation is a process for us. And I know you know what I'm talking about here. But it's only when we are really willing, when we're really willing to let go of what we have known, when we are willing to let go of the way things have been, that it becomes possible for us to move into a new life, to move into what we can be. Transformation requires forward thinking. But many of us, when we're faced with challenges today, we try to go back. We look for the good old days. We try the good old way, but we find it doesn't work. Think about the first few months coming out of the pandemic. If you are anything like me, I think that there was a period coming out of the pandemic, the first few months, that we longed for things to go back to normal, which meant we wanted them to be what? The way that they were. But what we didn't realize is that we were already smack in the middle of a totally new way of becoming. A totally new way of becoming. And for some of us, we're still trying to find our way through that. We're still dealing with some of the challenges and the discomfort and the confusion of some of that. Joseph Campbell said, "We must be willing to let go of the life we had planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us." I'm going to repeat that. We must be willing to let go of the life we had planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. In some ways, that sounds like a contradiction to one of the things we talk about in metaphysics. We talk about the power of affirmation, right? We talk about the power of visualization. We talk about using our imagination. We talk about setting goals and working toward those. In a way, we're talking about, to some extent, planning. Are we not? And then we have this very wise man, Joseph Campbell, saying something that is also true. It doesn't negate goal setting. It doesn't negate setting plans. It doesn't negate affirming and visualizing. But it is also true. We must be willing to let go of the life we had planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. What it means is it's a both and. We do the planning and the visualizing and all of those things, but we also hold it lightly, right? We also, I like to say, we give room for God to work something else bigger in and through and around us. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? It's not an either or. I think one of the pivotal moments for me in my understanding of these teachings when I really grasped that it's not binary, that it's not either or, it's both and. My mind, and maybe yours as well, would like things to be nice and neat and tidy. It's either this or it's that. Anybody else like that? Or am I the only one like that? It's either this or it's that. No, I think we share that in common. But there's the whole middle ground, right? And that's where it can be messy and confusing, but that's where we stay with it. If we're honest with ourselves, it's usually the challenges we finally have no choice but to meet that make us strong. I'm going to repeat that. If we're honest with ourselves, it's a big if. If we're honest with ourselves, it's usually the challenges we finally have no choice but to meet that make us strong. Would you agree with that? Can you think of some of the biggest challenges you faced in your life? And maybe it took a while before you were even willing to look at them and name them and face them. But when you did look at them and you did name them and you did face them and you did do whatever was the next right step, and you continue to do whatever was the next right step, I bet you have found that you then wound up in a place where you could look back and say, you know what? That probably was the best, worst thing that ever happened to me. Right? The best, worst thing that ever happened to me. It's not that we want those things to happen, but because of the way we choose to look at things in our teaching, we can look at those things, those challenges that we really would rather avoid, that we really wish we didn't have to deal with, just like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if this can be passed from me, let it pass. And then we find, no, it can't. It's ours to deal with. It's here. When we recognize, though, that it's here, and we pull on the strength that is within every single one of us, the inner strength and the outer strength of support around us, we do find that we emerge stronger because of that very thing. Amen. Thank you. Amen. We really, really, really do. A couple months ago, I guess it is now, I shared with you what was one of my favorite series. It was a series that I built around Philip Gulley's book about if the church were Christian, right? He also has another book that's a completely different kind of book, and it's delightful. It's called Front Porch Tales. And it's just little stories, little vignettes that he pulls from his life experience as teaching points, in a way a little bit like the author and other minister, Robert Fulghum. And in Front Porch Tales, he tells about a neighbor. There's a story he calls Growing Roots, and he tells about a neighbor who had an amazing grove of oak trees, the hardiest, strongest oak trees. And they had been neighbors for many, many years, and so they had both kind of planted their trees at about the same time. His neighbor, who happened to be a doctor, had a philosophy about growing oak trees, and that philosophy was not to water them, believing that by not watering them, letting whatever rain came and letting that be sufficient, that the roots of those oak trees would be forced to go really deep into the ground in search for moisture. Philip Gulley contrasts that with his approach to growing oak trees, where he would hand carry buckets of water to the trees, where he would over-fertilize them, where he would make sure that there was nothing that was bothering those trees. Excuse me, and then he describes that 30 years later, longtime neighbors, his neighbors' trees were enormous. Their trunks were like trunks of granite, and his were not very big, not very strong. What was the difference? What was the difference? And he wrote about this in a way that when I read it got me, as a mom, even though my kids are adults now, got me choked up. And I want to read to you what he wrote. He said, "Every night before I go to bed, I go check on my 2 sons. I often pray for them. Mostly I pray that their lives will be easy. But lately I'm thinking that it's time to change my prayer. I know my children are going to encounter hardship, and my praying they won't is naive. So I'm changing my prayer, because life is tough, whether we want it to be or not. Instead, I'm going to pray that my sons' roots grow deep so they can draw strength from the hidden sources of the eternal God. Too many times we pray for ease, but that's a prayer seldom met. What we need to do is pray for roots that reach deep into the eternal, so when the rains fall and the winds blow, we won't be swept asunder." Powerful visual, isn't it? And I think a really important reminder, and probably not the easiest thing to do. Not the easiest thing to do. Ernest Hemingway said, "The world breaks everyone, and afterwards some are strong at the broken places." That's such a powerful thought. We've all been broken, and we can be broken and fall apart, or we can be broken open and made stronger. Many times it is in the experiences in our lives that break us open that we find a capacity for wisdom and compassion and strength that we never knew we had. Has that been true for you? I know it's been true for me. I know it's been true. Sometimes we're broken open in ways that challenge us to our very core, but as we find a strength to meet whatever that thing was that broke us open, we find that there is a strength that we have developed that no one and nothing can take from us. I have said that kind of phrase and thought to family members and to some of you numerous times, that when you deal with this thing that you are dealing with right now, and you will overcome it, when you deal with it and you overcome it, you will have developed something inside of you that no one and nothing can ever take away from you. It's what makes you strong, what makes you strong. If we won't face it, we can't change it. And herein lies something that sometimes is a danger in our teaching. If we take our teachings, if we take unity at a superficial level, same thing with science of mind, if we take New Thought teachings at a superficial level, We are likely to just throw affirmations and positive thinking over deep problems and situations that we need to see clearly, acknowledge fully, name and deal with, or we will never get beyond them. Our teaching is not meant to be a Band-Aid. It's not meant to sweep things under the carpet. Our teaching is meant to help us have the strength to lean into and not away from the challenges and difficulties in our lives. Our teachings are meant to help us look at and name what is so, but know that in the naming of it, we're not limited by it. We're not limited by it. It's not at all uncommon for our challenges to be much more manageable when we finally face them than during that time that we are pretending they don't exist, right? Right? Things aren't always as they seem to be at first. Have you noticed that? This is why I think, we're cautioned in our teaching to really be careful about judging, about jumping to conclusions too quickly. Things aren't always as they seem to be. I remember reading a little story, and maybe it was in Gully's book, Front Porch Tales, of a young boy who was out by a pond, and he was sailing his toy boat, and the wind was kind of blowing it a bit, and he really liked this toy boat, and he was watching it, and all of a sudden it got carried away too far, and he couldn't reach the boat anymore, and he began to cry. And there was another young boy, a little bit older than the boy whose boat had drifted too far. And the older boy started throwing rocks toward the boat. And that made the young boy even sadder because he thought, he's going to destroy my boat, until he noticed something, until he noticed that the older boy throwing the rocks was throwing them just a little beyond the boat. And what that caused was a rippling that brought what? The boat back to the shore. I think that life is often like that for us. And perhaps one of the many gifts in our teachings and in our practices is we become better and better and better able to see that kind of perspective around whatever it is that is going on in our life. We don't deny it when it's hard. We don't sugarcoat it. But we recognize that those challenges are the very things that can help us transform. I believe that perhaps more than anything else, the challenges and difficulties that each person faces and has overcome are the very things that shape them into who they are today. It's usually not the easy things that shape us. I think the easy things are the wonderful gifts we get to kind of give us respite before other things start to happen. And those things can be financial things. Those things can be health challenge things. They can be a falling apart of a long-standing marriage or relationship to where we feel, again, oh, I'm being broken open. I'm being forced to find a new way to think, a new way to look, a new way to be. I want to close with one last visual that I came across as I was listening to a particular podcast. And it had to do with this idea that in most places in the country, we talk about 4 seasons, right? Kind of hard here in beautiful California. Our seasons are not as clearly defined as they are in other parts of the country. But, we have spring and summer and fall and winter. But in this particular podcast I was listening to by Reverend Sarah York, she talked about a 5th season in places like Maine and, where I grew up, Long Island. And it's called the season of mud. The season of mud. And some of you may be from Maine or Long Island might be able to relate to this idea of the season of mud. And she says it's about walking on the snow-covered beach near the bay that divides the eastern end of Long Island into those two forks. She says the beach resembled an Arctic glacier, but of course it was melting, and a few weeks later the shoreline was visible. But this is how she described it. And in her description, it really speaks to, I think, that in-between time where things might be falling apart because of a challenge that we're experiencing in our life, and we've not yet stepped into the new that wants to come forward, but we're in that middle space. And that middle space for many of us can be really difficult, right? The old is gone, but the new isn't quite there yet. Here's how she described it. She says, 2 weeks later, only a remnant of the imposing glacier remained, and I could stroll along a thin strip of sand between the water and the ice. I thought of the paradoxes of this in-between season when the rigid is juxtaposed with the fluid. Get a picture of that. When the rigid is juxtaposed with the fluid. When spring's warmth softens the winter earth and winter's chill snatches back the spring air. When each day is an unpredictable and unreliable combination of what was and what will be. When each day is an unpredictable and unreliable combination of what was and what will be. The season of mud begins with thunder and announces change. It is the season of transition. Transitions are times when the thick skin of habit, it's a good phrase, isn't it? The thick skin of habit that protected us, the thick skin of habit that protected us, surrenders to the possibilities of growth and renewal. The inner thawing renders us sensitive and vulnerable to the unpredictable until we emerge comfortably into new ways of being. We aren't sure who we are or where we will end up. In the midst of the mud and the muddle of all transitions, the seeds of promise stir quietly beneath the surface like spring bulbs drinking the snow. Isn't that a powerful visual? The thick skin of habit being shed. So a vulnerable aspect of us can come forward. And it's through that vulnerability that I think we experience transformation, that we experience an invitation to grow and to evolve. Close with these words from Seneca. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Namaste.